Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today. Dr. Mark, welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry.
Thanks so much for having me.
For those who are not familiar with you, why don't you give us the 30 seconds on your background?
Sure. Originally from Germany, I came to New York to launch and found Lexus, at the time the largest trading desk. Then I became the CEO of Seismic, which included at the time Rocket Fuel, X+1, majority of which we sold to Amazon. So I had the pleasure to spend 2 years at Amazon. And then I started the advertising business at Uber and brought it to about $1 million in revenues. And then most recently, last year, I joined PayPal to build the advertising business here at PayPal.
Dr. Mark has an absolutely glorious virtual background behind him. It's like a modernist, millennial gray mansion, which I personally am very into. I'm currently in an LA modernist house, Dr. Mark, and one of my friends visited and told me it looked like a high-end prison. So maybe we have some common architectural cause there.
The thing is, actually, my dad is an architect, right? And so when I was a kid, I grew up kind of not spending time at the beach, right? But actually spending time to see the Frank Lloyd Wrights of the world and other kind of really, really important architects in their buildings. And maybe that's kind of what you get if you have traveled with the dad the world and saw maybe too many buildings. So I take a nice background, yeah.
The son of an architect that traveled around the world looking at and designing buildings, gets into advertising and builds a $1 billion commerce media business at Uber in the span of 2 years. So how'd you do it?
It was a fun ride, right? And if you think about the Uber advertising business, there are basically 3 main elements of it. One of which is advertising in Uber Eats, which is sponsored listings at the end of the day, very similar to what Walmart has, very similar to what Amazon had. It's really about, hey, Eric opens on a Friday night at Uber Eats app because he's hungry, right? And he doesn't know what he should get for tonight. Is it the burger, is it sushi, is it pizza? And so advertisers, restaurants have the opportunity to basically get in front of Eric to convince him that he maybe should get sushi tonight. So that was basically one part of the business where users have purchase intent. The second part of the Uber advertising business is on the right side. So we know, or Uber knows, if Eric is right now on an Uber on the way to, let's say, Walmart. And that's a perfect opportunity for Procter & Gamble or Unilever to advertise based on the location, right? Or maybe we know that Joe is right now on the way to the US Open. Isn't it a great idea for Nike, right, or Adidas to advertise? So location data, real-time location data was the other big part of the Uber advertising business. And then most recently, it was also before I left, starting ads in our grocery and retail business. Same idea, purchase intent, sponsored items. So the Uber advertising business was really built out. Advertising in Uber Eats, advertising on the right side, and advertising in the grocery and retail business. And so we were able to kind of build this business quickly and also globally.
What of those advantages do you view as generalizable? In other words, other companies looking to stand up commerce media networks could think in similar ways about building their business, and what are specific to Uber?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that any kind of commerce media company needs to consider, right? And the first one is really what type of purchase intent do you actually have? What type of data do you have about your audience? And again, in our case or in the Uber case, having purchase intent is really, really crucial. That's the first one. The second one, which I think is also very important, is do you have enough real frequency, right? Because at the end of the day, advertisers won't spend or won't break down their retail media budgets between 100, 200 retail media companies or commerce media companies. It's about the scale that you have to have. It's about frequency that you have to have on your commerce media side. The third thing, which indeed was really good at Uber, was do you have the technology business, right? Uber is a technology company. And so having affinity to building technology, in our case, now advertising technology, was really, really crucial. And last but not least, the fourth element of building an advertising business in this space, it's having relationships to advertisers. Yeah. In the case of Uber, what was interesting was that on the one hand, we had relationships to the restaurants, which we call the endemic advertisers, and that gave us a head start. At the same time, we had to build a sales force to go to non-endemic advertisers, right? So the Nikes as an example, right? The Procter & Gamble, the Unilever, the Apples, which I mentioned earlier, those were non-endemic advertisers from an Uber perspective, and we had to invest into the sales force to build a relationship, and that takes time.
So scale, frequency, technology, relationships. On the other pod that I co-host, Marketecture, we had Ross Banesh from eMarketer on a few weeks ago. And he said that eMarketer is now tracking, I want to say the number was like 140 commerce media networks. There's probably even more. Every company is trying to build a commerce media network. It's a boom time there. Is the inverse of those why some of these commerce media networks might have challenges? So not enough scale, not enough frequency, not enough tech, not enough relationships, or are there other challenges as you built one of the best ones, you're now building another one. We want to spend time talking about that. Are there other challenges that these companies are facing, or are those the four that you check those boxes?
Maybe there's one more, if you may, right? Which is that for many companies, building retail media or commerce media business is new, right? And so there's a lot of internal education needed. What does it actually mean to build an advertising business, right? That's a big challenge that there's a lot of education required internally, a lot of hand-holding, a lot of convincing what's important to build an advertising business. And on the surface, the answer is pretty clear, which is it's a high margin business, right? Why not building a business that has 80, 90% margin, right? Everyone wants to do that. But it is actually a little bit nuanced. And one of the things that I'm seeing right now in our industry is that for many layers who start early, the honeymoon is actually over. What I mean by that is that in the beginning and 90% margin, it was easy to make a few bucks here by monetizing inventory. But what then started to happen is they realized that they quickly run out of inventory. Because again, they don't have the reach and they don't have the frequency, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. And then suddenly the music stops, right? The question is, okay, what can I do to explore my revenue if I'm already sold out on my own inventory? And then, okay, let's go offsite. Yeah. But suddenly with offsite, the problem is it's not 80, 90% margin business, right? It's maybe 20% at best, maybe 30%. Secondly, your data may not be differentiated in an offsite context, right? Because there's not where purchase intent actually happens. Yeah. Then suddenly it becomes much more complex in terms of things like data privacy. Then maybe there's a different buyer, maybe a problematic buyer you don't have a relationship with. And so what I'm seeing in many cases is that companies sold out on their inventory, has started to do offsite, but not really getting traction. And then the CFO is losing interest in continuous investing into the business to get to the next growth level, right? And so that is a big challenge for many of the players in industry. And at the same time, Eric, to your point, an advertiser, an agency, they don't want to work with 150 companies, right? They don't want to have a media plan that exists of 150 line items. It's just too much, right? It's just too much. And so what will happen, and I'm sure we will talk a little more about it in the context of PayPal, is aggregation needs to happen, consolidation needs to happen. And hey, we've been in this business for a long time. It's not the first time that consolidation happened in our industry, right? It happened in the DSP world. It happened in the SSP world. It happened in mobile back in the day, and it happened in display. It's just kind of the evolution of our industry. I think we are now at a point where consolidation is the next big thing. And then the question is, who are the ones who are bringing different commerce media companies together to overcome the reach challenge, to overcome the frequency challenge, and to be large enough for an advertiser to care?
Okay, so you believe that was going to be our next question, right? You believe that consolidation is coming, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you said, you think there will be large players that might play some sort of aggregation layer role.
Yeah, yeah.
There's this concept floating around of building for the non-endemics, build something where if you have truly enough scale, be able to sell not just to the brands that are endemic or the suppliers that are endemic to you, but, have something for everybody else. Is that business that many folks think can be a big business? In your mind, is that a good idea, or is it inherently not because of the nature of commerce media?
I think it's a good idea. It's an important idea. It's almost a must-have. And there are a couple of reasons. The first one is if you think about commerce media, as I mentioned, in most cases, it's sponsored listings. And in most cases, it comes from the merchant you already have a relationship with. And therefore, if we're really true to ourselves, many cases, it's a left pocket, right pocket conversation. Meaning, right, I can go to let's say, in Uber case, to a restaurant provider and say, listen, hey, there are two choices of how you get more eyeballs. You either pay a higher technology platform fee and gives you a boost, or you pay more in the advertising CPC form and then you get boost, right? The first one is not considered advertising. The second one is considered advertising. For the restaurant owner, it's in both cases just pay to play. It's just an expense. So in many cases, spawner listings, endemic is not 100% true incremental to the P&L of the commerce media company. However, non-endemic revenue is pure incremental. It's 100% incremental, right? And that's why $1 from non-endemic is more valued than $1 from an endemic advertiser. And now the trick comes, okay, how do you now get access to non-endemic advertisement? And you have two type challenges. The first one is you typically don't have a relationship with the non-endemic advertisers. So how do you build a relationship to non-endemic advertisers? Do you do that via channel partners? Do you do that by building out your own sales force? Or maybe a combination thereof. Maybe you start with a channel partner and then over time you build your own sales force to go after non-endemics. And then the second question is, if you do have now access to non-endemic advertisers, what is the best placement on your commerce side to actually run a non-endemic campaign, right? And ideally, you want to do it so that it has least friction on your core commerce business, meaning the placement ideally is not before you actually have the transaction. So post-checkout, for example, is therefore typically the first placement that you use to get after non-endemic advertisement. You build confidence level with that. And then over time, you may actually add more placements, a little more upper funnel, so to speak, or early in the funnel. Again, coming back to, for example, Uber, the great thing about the rides business was, as I mentioned earlier, it was almost all non-endemic. And therefore, it was truly, truly incremental. And it was one of the kind of cool things about building the Uber advertising business.
So, Mark, we spoke about the sell side in terms of the sorts of media owners who would be well positioned to launch commerce media networks. On the buy side, what types of brands and agencies are most interested? Is it the biggest ones? One would imagine, for example, that retail media might be a relatively complicated opportunity for smaller advertisers to access. How do you think about that question of access and how the space might be evolving?
What I've seen in this space is that a lot of demand actually comes from SMBs. Yeah, because the SMBs, the ones who do not have the awareness from consumers, they're the ones who need invest into retail media aid sponsor listings the most. It's almost kind of the formula that if you want an advertiser, a big brand, right, they want to measure incrementality. And the harder it is to prove incrementality, the more it's a signal that your brand is actually really, really strong. Vice versa, if you are a small player, a small SMB player who is not known by the audience, by your customers, right? You need to invest actually in sponsor listings to actually get the eyeballs and get the purchases, right? So it's really interesting. On the one hand, the more and more demand comes from SMBs. Ideally, you have a self-service platform, again, endemic advertiser, but that's a cornerstone of any retail media business. It's much easier for them to show incrementality. And for the big brands, who are much more demanding, incrementality is for a much bigger question and a much harder question to prove that you can truly provide incrementality to them.
So that makes sense. And then think about the tech players, right, who have gotten involved. So we've covered the commerce media network owners, the advertisers. Then in terms of the tech players who have gotten involved, it seems that the Trade Desk and Criteo would be the best known examples of companies that obviously didn't start as native commerce media businesses, but had a lot of success getting into the sector. Do you view the landscape that way? And what would you say has enabled them to successfully enter the space?
I would actually have a little bit kind of more pointed perspective, which is you have to basically think about it in a supply and demand perspective. On the supply side, right, you are a retail company or a commerce company, right? You first need to make sure that your media, your eyeballs can become accessible for retail media budgets. You need to power your media, right? So that you actually can make it sellable, right? As I mentioned, in many cases, that is about sponsored listings. Hence, you pick a player that's really strong in sponsored listings. And there are many out there. Some are bigger, some are smaller, right? That's typically the first one. Or you say, hey, I'm not going into sponsored listings. I'm just running some display campaigns on my inventory. And then you're looking for an ad server, right, to basically enable your supply in this form. That's the supply side. And that's typically the first question that you need to answer as you're building out your commerce media business. Then the second question is, how do I get access to demand? And interestingly enough, as we've done it again and again in the past, the first step is managed service, meaning you are just getting actually IOs from advertisers, right? And then at some point you want to say, okay, now let me scale. Let it go and get more demand in a self-service capacity. And then you start to again say, okay, now should I get demand via the Trade Desk, via Criteo, StackAdapt, or whoever else are the demand players who actually give me access to demand in the self-service capacity. But again, as to building the business, that's typically not question number one. That's question number three. You first build a blind side, start with managed service, and eventually you go to self-service.
Got it. So today you're the head of advertising for PayPal ads. What attracted you to PayPal?
The thing about PayPal and the data that PayPal has access to, right? At PayPal, we have access to 30 million merchants globally, right? Our transaction graph is larger than anyone in our industry. We see more transactions than anyone else. We see about 25% of global commerce. It's a tremendous amount of data that we have access to, right? And at the same time, we have access to 400 million users using PayPal and Venmo globally. So think about, on the one hand, the amount of data, the relationships that we have with merchants, and on the other hand, the amount of relationship that we have on the demand side with our consumers. And bringing that together, this kind of platform, the two-sided platform, is a huge opportunity for PayPal and for myself as I'm building the next business, like we spoke in the beginning, building now the next business from the ground up. And so that attracted me to do it at PayPal.
It's interesting, Mark, when we asked you about Uber, you said that the things commerce media networks need, as illustrated by Uber's success, are purchase intent, reach and frequency, technology, and relationships to advertisers. And it would seem that PayPal, which I should mention is a sharp end client, has all four of those things in spades. So I imagine that's a lot of what attracted you to the opportunity.
Exactly. That's exactly spot on. Yeah. We have all of that.
A lot of people forget that Venmo is owned by PayPal and it is like one of the most widely used apps across the generations. Younger people, use that as the way that they, exchange money and pay for things. Stop laughing, Joe.
That was Eric's "How do you do, dog kid" moment. I saw the intergenerational mockery opportunity just arising. It was like the kids love Venmo. They're using it they use it for everything. It's crazy.
Exactly. And it's a verb, right? You Venmo someone.
Just like Eric once learned to use Facebook as a verb, he's now learning to use Venmo as a verb, and we're all very happy for him.
All right. When can we expect to see ads on PayPal? That's all I want to know. On Venmo, I'm sorry.
We just launched ads on Venmo. So we launched actually originally ads on PayPal last fall. And now a few weeks ago, we launched now ads on Venmo. We also announced the UK as our first international market, where we are now launching PayPal ads. So again, the businesses are off to a fast start, and we have grown this business very, very quickly.
You mentioned up top the need for consolidation in the commerce media space. So I imagine PayPal would be well positioned to play a role in that and broadening accessibility and consolidating, given that you already have that view across tens of millions of merchants.
That's exactly correct, right? We already have the view across millions of merchants. We already have the relationship with both the merchants and the consumers. We already have tech integrations with the merchants, right? And equally importantly, we are a neutral player in the industry, right? We are not just a commerce player who wants to kind of grow its territory, right? We are a neutral player who has been in the industry for many, many years with one important purpose, which is to enable consumers to pay in a safe and trusted environment, which actually help merchants to sell more. And that's what, at the end, an advertising business is, right? We want to enable our merchants to sell more products, and we want to do so in a way that we show consumers the best ways of what they actually should buy and how they should pay.
Makes sense. A friend of mine, James Burrow, he's now the head of Universal Ads for Comcast. He has something he says called I think it's payments are the new cookies. Just given how we all sort of kind of know the future cookie deprecation will happen, and cookies never really were a great proxy for users. Gosh, if you had payment data, imagine what you could do to basically serve both audiences you were talking about, make things relevant for consumers and drive outcomes for merchants to the extent that you're able to. Can you talk about how you can use payment data?
Yeah, actually, I like the term payments are the new cookies. I think that's it's a good line. So thank you for sharing. And yeah, if you think about now the transaction that we have within PayPal, as I mentioned, from 30 million merchants, right? And it's our data. We own the data, right? Which means we can use it, yeah, for targeting, for measurement. Especially, I'm excited about the measurement angle. Again, thinking about the measurement angle, the fact that we know where people buy, let's say, a pair of sneakers across so many merchants, which means we can go back to the merchant, and say, listen, hey, you should actually spend more of your advertising dollar on merchant one versus merchant two because the ROAS is higher on merchant one versus merchant two, right? We can help you in media planning. I spoke earlier about the importance of incrementality, which is a really, really important KPI, but I would make the argument that even more important KPI is actually market share. The CMO cares about incrementality. The CEO, who at the end of the day owns the budget, cares about market share. He wants to know, is my market share growing versus my competition? And we can answer that question for him because we see the market across so many merchants where his product and his competing products get sold. And so we can come back to an advertiser and say, hey, we show you market share. We can show you how market share is trending over time. We can help you on which merchants you should spend more of your retail media budgets because that's where more consumers are and buy more of your products. So measurement insights is a huge, huge opportunity for us, given that we have this kind of breadth and depth of transaction data.
You were just talking about PayPal's vast transaction data helping advertisers do better targeting and measurement and refine their media programs. But there's also on the other end of the system, the consumer. And one might think about the way that commerce media could actually better serve the consumer and their evolving expectations in terms of surfacing products more easily, creating a more connected experience, helping them with AI-driven discovery, this kind of thing. Could you talk a little bit about that and how commerce media networks need to evolve as consumer behaviors are evolving?
Yeah, I think there are two angles to it, right? The first and almost most obvious one is that as we have this kind of more holistic view about the consumer, we can help our merchants to better personalize what they actually sold to consumers, right? Because we know more about a single consumer than an individual merchant, right? Which means the experiences that consumers have on merchant websites will become more personalized, more relevant. And as a consequence of that, they will actually purchase more, which will benefit the merchants. Now, if you think about the next steps, and you mentioned AI, right? The way how consumers are going to make purchases in the future, right? will definitely change, right? We talk internally a lot about agentic commerce, right? And what role we can play in agentic commerce on the one hand, from a payments perspective, right? Within these kind of AI tools, but then also how can we help AI to learn quicker about the preferences of consumers so that experiences that the consumers have as they are making themselves familiar with agentic commerce becomes better and better. And so it's a huge opportunity for us from two perspectives, from the consumer perspective and from a payments perspective. The other thing, what we're also seeing as we think about kind of the convergence of payment and advertising, is that we see that more and more payments and transactions will actually be concluded in the ad, in the creative itself, right? It's almost kind of, you can pay everywhere and you can buy everywhere. You don't need to go to a dedicated landing page, right? Which maybe has some friction points because you need to go through 3 hops, right? You then finally go to a landing page to purchase. You can actually do that in the creative itself, which means less friction. It's easier for the consumer, high conversion rates for merchants, but also importantly, easier to provide a feedback loop attribution back to the merchant. So we see in the future a lot of, again, transactions will happen in a creative and pay by PayPal, pay by Venmo, right? We are the ones who will enable that at scale globally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously we're all advertising guys, so we're talking our collective book, but Eric and I were talking a couple episodes ago about OpenAI and Sam Altman's resistance to ads entering into the AI ecosystem. But I think PayPal's vision is that these things can go together, and that actually as AI tools develop and commerce becomes more agentic and product discovery becomes more agentic, ads can play a role in surfacing useful information sort of organically in a way that's not intrusive and in a way that accelerates the customer journey, which is hypothetically good for all parties.
Absolutely spot on. Yeah, correct.
And Joe, to your point, taking it a step further, if there's companies like PayPal that can play a role in just completing a transaction, as a trusted agent for, not to overuse the term, for a user, that looks like a really interesting future.
The only other thing I would touch on is we talked about AI from the consumer point of view. Like Mark, you were involved in building the Uber ads business, 3-ish years ago. So much has changed in terms of AI capabilities since then. How is building a big commerce media network business different now with the advances in AI since then in terms of how you offer capabilities to the advertisers who will be doing business with you?
It's a great question, and there are 2 dimensions. One of which is just the way of how we are building the business from the ground up is different, right? And the good news is, as we are building it now, we can build it almost kind of AI first. Yeah, meaning the way how we think about ad operations. Of course, our ad operations organization is AI enabled, right? It's not that we have processes we need to adopt to AI. We build it from the ground up with AI. When we write product requirement documentations, of course, we're using AI to make the process more efficient and more effective, right? So that the build itself, it's really interesting. It's from the get-go powered by AI, and that make kind of our lives easier, right? And then, as I mentioned, on the advertiser side, it's really interesting to see that we see a lot of conversations right now. How can you use AI for things like creative? Right. And I think that's a big opportunity in our industry as a whole. Over the last 10, 15 years, we spoke about audiences, we spoke about targeting, and we can target anyone, everyone, right? And at the same time, we're showing most audience segments the same creative. What's the point in segmentation if the creative is not really kind of tailored to the segments that we can target, right? And so I do think creative is almost the next big frontier in our industry when it comes to leveraging AI, so that we have hundreds of different variations of creatives created by AI, optimized by AI, and therefore experiences that consumers will see will be much more personalized, much more relevant. So I think creative AI, DCO will have a renaissance, right? It's a really big topic for us in the next couple of months.
Spoken like a guy who used to run Seismic.
To quote Peter Thiel, of course, a co-founder of PayPal, you guys seem to have something of a last mover, or at least later mover advantage here, right? In that you've already seen what works and what doesn't in terms of building commerce media businesses, but also you're building this business at this incredibly opportunistic juncture where AI has taken such a great leap forward. So instead of having to go backwards and rebuild a lot of the infrastructure with AI, as you said, you're building an AI native commerce media network, which probably is going to offer a huge advantage.
Exactly. And at the same time, we always have scale, right? So we have almost kind of the best of both worlds. We're not just a simple startup, yes, who can do AI native, but we can do AI native because we are a startup in the larger ecosystem of people who has access to the 400 million users, 30 million merchants. And that's, I think, the perfect kind of opportunity for us.
That's actually a very interesting point you raised, Joe, and I hadn't thought about that, which makes me ask this question to you, Dr. Mark. How might things be different with you running PayPal ads versus you in your previous roles and recent roles? That could be tech, that could be people, that could be processes.
Yeah, okay. From that perspective, indeed, there is definitely a few differences, right? One of which I would really say is ad operations, right? In the past, organizations typically had large ad operations organizations, right? They managed campaigns, they were in charge of reporting and billing and optimization and whatnot. A lot of that in the future will be done AI enabled, and hence you will just need fewer bodies. Let's be honest about it, right? It's just the difference there, right? The other thing is a lot of the stuff we are building here at PayPal is in many ways tail sticks, meaning, yes, of course, at the end, we have to have a decision engine, right? Or a pacing engine or a budgeting engine or a forecasting engine, right? We are not reinventing the wheel here, right? And we are not inventing a new industry. And hence, there is already a lot out there that you can basically all pick up off the shelf, and AI helps you to pick up stuff off the shelf, which is much better, and you can build it much faster. And so I think the go-to market and the way how you design products, as I mentioned, PRDs and things like that, will be just fast-tracked by leveraging AI. That's another kind of really exciting opportunity after kind of building out your product function. Again, where I think where a lot of opportunity still is, and don't think that we start to scratch the surface, is definitely on the creative front. What will be interesting is how AI and measurement is going to play together, right? How things like attribution modeling may be improved in the future. Also interesting is the question of targeting. I could imagine that in the future, we will actually need less data to do good targeting because AI is able to kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak. That's not a kind of interesting development, but I don't think that we are there yet, at least not at scale.
Makes perfect sense. That's a bright future.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about AI and how it'll reinvent the advertising industry. So I think getting a concrete peek into how it's affecting the early days of the next billion-dollar commerce media business is a good note to end on. Thank you very much, Dr. Mark.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Beth.
All right.
We'll talk soon.
Bye, guys.